Christensen, all of those other projects we've been doing together were just the appetizer. Get ready for the main course. We landed a big client, Mix, and they want a wicked cool spot to show off their new AI-powered playlist. We recreated the famous Maxwell tapes ad from the 80s and updated it for the streaming era. We also had Nydia Diaz create some killer style frames and elements for you to use, so you should have all the ingredients necessary to make this thing sing. I know I don't need to say this to you, you're a professional, but don't screw this one up. You are the best.
I have to say, it makes me a little wistful that no client would send you a message like that without believing it was going to lead you to immediately double your rates. Let's take a look at what we have this time.
The usual, ma'am.
Please.
Mix AI, like a butler for your ears.
All right, here it is, the big finale, the final countdown, whatever you want to call it. This time, we're going to be prepping for the design work, which means we're going to be delving back into some technical things that we've done in the past. And we're going to have the opportunity to go a bit further with those, which I'm pretty excited about. Breaking it down in After Effects, we have 5 shots here, and essentially 2 sections of the piece. There is the first part with a missing screen being the predominant visual effect that's needed, and then we need the screen, not the missing screen. And then we switch into the big party here, and who knows what the heck is going to happen after that point, but this is clearly an area where if we're going to add to this shot, we are going to need some tracking. So I'm going to start with the biggest question mark right here and work my way backwards. Of course, at this point, before we go any further, it would be really helpful if I would show you what we're actually trying to design. So for the shot where the butler holds up the device, there is a music player, which is laid out here. And then once we go to the wide shot, we are in the midst of, well, I don't know how to describe it, but it is audio synesthesia, if you will. It is audio that is visually coming out of the speaker and not only blowing back the hair and the lamp and the drink, but also, in our case, creating graphical torrents. Now, what those are going to look like, how they're going to move, we don't know, but we do kind of know that they're going to fill the space. And in this concept, what I see very clearly is that a lot of them are effectively 2D. They are sticking to the wall or the floor. And then these lightning bolts and the ribbons are appearing to float out in 3D space. You can see some overlap. You can see that they have perspective. But that, of course, is just one idea. And then, of course, we got the end of the logo. So that's really what we got in terms of style frames. If I switch to just looking at elements, these are those elements that you see stuck to the wall, and they individually could become particles that are distributed around. And then there are 3D elements that we'll get into more in the next lesson, but that's what you see with those lightning bolts and the ribbon. We will pull one of those in at some point in this lesson. And then, of course, there is the artwork that you see, the app itself and the CD covers. So we have those to work with. And then Nydia also gave us some paint strokes, which she used a little bit for the 3D elements, but it's like she had leftovers. So these don't have a direct purpose. They're just kind of cool things that could get incorporated. And I think we saw the logo already. What we're doing right now is setting ourselves up for everything prior to this master shot. And in the preceding shot, the first one we are going to work on now, that's where we're starting to see something happening visually. We don't know what yet, so what I'm doing is just getting the plate ready for those elements to be tracked in. It's not clear in this case what type of track we need from the style frame. We're going to be placing graphics that should appear to just either be free floating in the air or actually sticking to predominantly the floor and the wall surfaces. It's possible that planar tracking would help here, but it's a little bit of a straw man argument because I happen to know that Mocha is going to have a hard time with this. And the reason is all the changes in the images. So let's just spend 1 minute investigating that. Here's why I know beforehand that this scene is going to be a problem for Mocha. There are a bunch of red flags. Let's suppose that the lighting didn't even change and we just needed to track this section right here. Now remember, we saw graphics on the floor and on the wall. So by working in Mocha, we've even gotten rid of the idea of having them in 3D space. This is only going to provide us with planes. But that could be helpful. So let's see what happens if we just select, well, what I think would be most successful would be the floor. So let's take a section of floor. And the reason I think the floor would succeed is that it has recognizable detail that is distinct from everything else around it. So let's track backwards on just the floor. All right, we can call that a success. Now let's see what happens if we go forward. We didn't even make it one frame. Let's see what that next frame looks like. Aha, okay. So let's suppose we need to start from this frame where the lighting changes. So we'll track from here. Okay, we didn't make it very far. Let me say okay and start the track again. And now it won't even move forward. Let's see what the next frame from here looks like. The problem is, to our naked eye, this is recognizably continuous between these two frames. But to Mocha, it's analyzing everything about this, and a lighting change, some reflection, extra shadows, all those things to Mocha are completely different, and it doesn't know where to look. Now, conceivably, you could adjust the scene, or you could try to make it more palatable to Mocha, make it black and white, try to maybe manually adjust these levels so that they're not varying. It's going to be tough. You'd think there'd be an automatic control to do this, and yet auto levels, I'm going to tell you right now, would not get you there. Add to that what's happening on the back wall. So the lamp moving around like this, that's creating the only recognizable element. It's shadow and penumbra. I think that's what you call that. But this blank part of the wall was already going to be a problem. Like if we go back here and try to track the back wall, I think it'll work, maybe. And if not, I mean, there's that speaker. The problem with the speaker, of course, is we don't want to put anything on the speaker. And in a 2D track, it's not really going to help us. But one thing at a time. So let's see what happens if we track backward on the wall. And by leaving this one active, I'm actually retracking both of them. My bad. So great. Now we'll move forward. And again, as soon as the lighting change occurs, or even if we were to get past that, we're in big trouble. Now, one other thing we could do, I'll just delete both of those. There are recognizable little spots. Like here literally is a spot on the floor. So let's see what happens if instead of having such a wide area, if we just narrow it right down and just have Mocha track that. Okay, that is working a lot better. So that could get us the floor, and I don't see anything equivalent on the wall, but the thing about this is what we really have here is not a planar track. We effectively have a point track, and that could be a clue for how we're actually going to solve this scene. So at this point, I'm going to give up on Mocha because it was never going to give me what I really wanted, which is a way to actually have elements coming out of the speaker in this shot into 3D rather than just 2D planar space. So I don't want all my elements just stuck on the floor or the wall. I actually want them to parallax right out here in space. What we really want is a camera track. So let's try Camera Tracker. Camera Tracker also not happy. I guess that's unsurprising, because if we look at the shot, I'll just delete that, we are able with the naked eye to see exactly what's happening, but for the pixel analysis to understand that, for example, that speaker is the same before and after the lights go off, and that all this flickering light is something to ignore, well, that's kind of a tall order. So at this point, one typical response might be we need to get a pro on this, somebody who's got camera tracking software and knowledge that can handle these complex type of situations, because our tools just aren't cutting it. We're not amateurs, we're pros, and that's why we are going to turn to the oldest and most primitive tracking tool in After Effects. That's right, you got it. The point tracker. The point tracker is the most manipulable, i.e., I can fix what goes wrong. It's the easiest to see what it's doing. It has quite a few options, and, well, enough said. Let's just get in here. There's a challenge, of course, to know what to track in this scene. We don't get all this detail over here on the right until later. At the beginning, it's a speaker on a floor. And of course, I want the point that's going to stay in frame as long as possible. So I'm looking at you, upper corner of speaker. I'll start at the beginning. Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to start right where the light changes, because I think that is one thing that any tracker is going to have problems with. I mean, look at the difference there. So let's just go right here, zoom it in, and right on my point. And then I simply move it into place around my corner. And I'll be a little more generous. It's going to run really fast with it being this small a target area. I don't really want the back because of parallax. And so I think, just for giggles, I'm going to have the attach point be right along that seam there and kind of do it like that. And there's no reason for that. I just want to make it easy to see that in a second. And in case you missed it, that middle area that I'm adjusting is called the feature region. That's what the tracker is looking for. And then the larger box around it is the tracking region. That is where it's going to look for that feature. So it's not going to look around the entire frame, but just in that area around the feature. Easiest thing to do is going to be to track backward to start. That was a no-brainer. It's helpful to reveal your tracking keyframes, especially when you know you're going to be doing a track in sections, as we will be. In this case, I can see at least 3 sections. There's normal lighting that we just tracked, crazy lighting, which is next, and then whatever happens after the speaker leaves the frame. I'm going to go 1 frame forward because, check this out, I have the option to track 1 frame, and it did it, but you can see, because I made it really easy to see where my attach point was, that it didn't hold its place. So instead, I'll go manually, just for 1 frame. And I think it should actually be right in line with what I had. So the fact that the line I was going to the center of has changed a little bit, I think is just simply because of the lighting. So from there, I'll zoom back out a bit so I can see the edge of frame, because that's going to be our next stopping point. And here I could even say, once we get to the edge of frame, stop tracking, because that's going to send confidence down. I don't have to do that, but that'll save me cleaning up some keyframes since I know that's coming. Okay, so now I'm tracking forward. Again, muy rápido. Oh, well, the stop tracking option somehow didn't work. It is, after all, only the point tracker. Look, point tracker, I hope you're not listening. You did a great job. And now we're just going to get rid of these pesky keyframes we don't need. So now we have a transition. And luckily for us, we have more things to track. You might think it would now get into a complicated situation with having to chain together multiple tracks, and I have seen it done that way. You can do it, but you don't need to. And here's how. Let me go full frame, just so it's easy to see. So remember that whenever you track multiple points, you want them to be equidistant from camera, aka coplanar. The plane is imaginary in this case, but the speaker and the chair, or at least some part of it, are very similar distance from the wall. And if I have to choose between the front and the back part of the chair, I think I'm going to pick the back. So specifically, I'm looking at that nice corner right over there. It's worth seeing if anything moves, and it really doesn't. Okay, so I'm going to go back to that last good frame, and I'll hold down the Command key because I'm on a Mac. Now, you've already probably noticed how the cursor changes to let me resize the feature of the track region with that white arrow. But I also get the white arrow if I hold down Command, if I hit just the right spot. Now I can take the entire tracker and move it over to here. I'll put it right there. But notice the little crosshair is still where it was. In fact, did I miss by a frame? Oh, no, that's correct. So actually, that is the current frame. And now we're going to create the next frame starting from here. And let's do that. So that was rock solid and very fast. I have all these keyframes. And if we look, you can kind of tell that this continues that curve in a pretty steady way. But if you really want to see it, let's look at the attach point in the graph editor, and you can see X and Y, the continuous movement. And it's a beautiful thing if you're a nerd. So that's it. That's the solution. Now, the way I'm going to apply this is not as a transform, but as a stabilize. I know that seems a little strange. Just stick with me. So here we go. And now let's take a look at what we've got. Well, it does appear to be fairly well stabilized. So at this point, you're probably wondering where the heck we're going with this. How does isolating a speaker so that it's sitting in one place have to do with having a full three-dimensional camera track? Well, that means I got you right where I want you. Now, the next thing I want to do is just bring in another version of this that doesn't have stabilization on it. You could call it a reference for now. Just gonna move it below. I'll just turn it off for now, but I'll be using it later. I'll call that one plate, and I'll call this one stabilize. So the reason that I'm doing this is about to be revealed. But before I do it, I just want to build it up a little more, because let's just check out what we've got and what we want. So what we've got is a stabilized shot of a speaker, and then the camera drifts off. And what we want is a recreation of the camera that ran along tracks left to right, so that we can get all the parallax and everything else that's in the original scene and use it for 3D elements. We are avoiding sending this out to a specialist to 3D track it for us in some dedicated software, and we're going to do it in a really easy way, and then I'll explain after we do it why it worked. Let's start at the very beginning and add a camera. Now, I'm going to make this a one node camera. It doesn't really matter, but it could make my life easier at some point. It's worth asking what the zoom or angle of view should be. In After Effects, 50mm is always the setting that doesn't change the view. So if you change a layer to be 3D and add a 50mm camera in its default position, it's as if nothing changed. So if only for that reason, that's the camera I'm going to go with. And I'll have more to say about that, but I'm going to call this Tracker Cam. And we only have 2D layers, so I got a little warning. No big deal. I can do a little housekeeping and just trim it down. So now let's go ahead and make the stabilized layer a 3D layer. And let's go ahead and take the tracker cam and parent it to that stabilized layer. Now, it should seem like kind of a no-brainer that we're back to where we were, because if you can't visualize this, what's happening is the camera is following around. Well, what is it following around? So the shot is now staying in place, or is it? No, it's really not, but the speaker is. The scene is staying in place, and it's as if the camera's moving around it. Whoa. Okay, well, let's test this out. Let's see. We know the distance from camera where our plane is. And let's just double check that it is in its default position. I don't need to see the tracker. So the anchor point is all that's being moved, and on the Z plane, it's still at 0. I will add a solid, and it doesn't matter what it is. It's just a reference, like so often the case. So let's call it ref, and it's fine that it's comp size. And now I'll make it 3D, and let's just see what's happening. Okay. Interesting. So that seems to be tracking with the scene. So let's say that I now want to determine where my floor is using the solid. So of course, I'll apply an effect to generate a grid. And I think it'd be nice if it had squares rather than rectangles. So I'll take the size from the width and I'll make it more like, I don't know, 200. That looks great. Oh, except I would like lines to be displaying right at the edges, so let's just come down until we see those. Yep, right there at 180. That's great. Now take the rotate tool, W, rotate it down flat and move it. I'm going to move it down to the bottom corner of the speaker, because what do I know? I tracked the front edge of the speaker, and now I want the ground plane to be on the ground, and it is right there. Let's make double extra super secret sure that it is right there. It is. Okay, what's going on with my grid only being half there? Well, now we're in a little fight between 3D layers. One of them is bisecting the other one. This is where I no longer need my stabilized 3D layer. I mean, I still need it as a null. What I'm going to do is turn it off and lock it and turn on the other one that I brought in. So now the grid's not bisecting, and all I need to do, as you've seen me do before, I'll now call this floor grid. I'm going to just widen. Actually, I think holding down shift is a good idea to keep these square. And I just want it to be touching the baseboard somewhere back there. And now that I've done that, I'm going to change this. I'm going to cut it in half and go to 90. Great. So let's see what happens. That is now, it needs to be rotated a little bit. So the camera was slightly canted. And then it seems to be floating up off the floor. But remember, this technique is depending on the fact that we didn't have a lot of rotation of the camera. So we can compensate for a little bit. If it were handheld and it were rotating all over the place, this would be a lot harder. So that last point is a little bit significant. The more the camera is panning around the frame, the less this is going to work, because you have more hand animation that you start having to do, and the ability to lock off the shot as things you're locking off on change perspective kind of goes away. So this is really relying on the fact that it was a panning shot where the camera operator DP was really keeping it non-rotating for the most part, but it does rotate a little bit, and that's okay. Also, the lens is clearly neither long or wide. Is it actually 50 millimeter? That's a complicated question. The Red camera and the After Effects camera don't have the same size. After Effects has a virtual size, but it's based on a 35 millimeter still camera, which is a full frame sensor, and we're talking back in the days of only film. This is before even digital cameras, when it was set that way. That's a bit of trivia. But the thing it's helpful to know is if you ever needed to know exactly what to set it at, if you had the setting from the actual camera, which we do have, it was 55 millimeters on the red camera, and you want to go look it up, you can find out what the multiplier would be to get from the red sensor, I think we were shooting on the Epic, if I remember correctly, to get from that to a full frame 35 millimeter. But we don't need to do that. We're going to be fine. Let's move on. Before I move forward getting rotations happening here, it would be really helpful if the center of the floor grid were at 0. Center, of course, is arbitrary in this case, but let's take a look at what position we've got right now. So what I'd like to do is set that to 0. If I zero it out now, for example, on that axis, it's going to head to the ceiling, so that's not what I want. Instead, I'll open back up the current center of my world to which the camera is still parented. And I'm just going to look at the transforms in here. So I'll twirl down. Don't need to see the motion trackers. And actually, let's just look at position. Just P for position. And you see some similarities here. So what I'm going to do is subtract 960 from 960. I can do that. That's 0. I'm going to subtract 1023 from 540. That one's a little harder. So I'm going to say minus 1, 0, 2, 3 right there. And now, if I go back up here, say 0, 0, we're back. And now that point right in front of the speaker on that grid is the center of this world. Okay, a little bit of housekeeping. I can lock the stabilize layer again, because rather than mess with that to create this camera rotation, I'm going to use, of course, the camera. Now, the way I'm going to do this, you might not agree. You might like the camera tool. I personally am more comfortable with working with the controls right here in the timeline, specifically orientation. So with the camera, let's see, you use different mouse buttons, so I can zoom in and out, which I don't want to do. I can move around, which I don't want to do. I can rotate, but it's not as fine a control as I want. That's my excuse. So instead, for me, what's going to work better is just to hold down the command key and rotate it here. But I don't want to be on the x-axis, so if I do something wrong, I just undo it. I want to be on the z, and that's looking pretty lined up with the bottom of the baseboard. But I want that grid to be a little larger so that it reaches right out to there. So this is actually the grid I want. I can just grab this little thing right here, hold down Shift. Let me just see, though, if a slight extra adjustment on that Z orientation is what I need. I'm gonna kind of split the difference here. And parallax we now have. Now, if this looks wrong to you, remember that the points on the grid that correspond with the front of the speaker are way down here. And we haven't done any comping of elements over the grid. So Our Lady in the chair and the speaker look weird. It's an optical illusion. So what I'm going to do is set an opening keyframe for orientation. Let's just go to the last frame. I just want to see as much as I can. This time I'm going to adjust the X first. Again, holding down my command key. Clearly, again, we've also rotated a bit on Z. I can again raise my exposure just so I can clearly see. And readjust the X just a little more. Ooh, that's pretty nice. And thankfully, there's no Y rotation, which would have been the camera actually rotating what you might call its heading. And we really don't want that. That would change a bunch of other things. So I need another keyframe somewhere in the middle. I'll just go right here. This is going to be more than good enough for what we're trying to do here. I think that's awesome. Now we can add a back wall. So I'll take another grid, call this one wall grid, and rotation time, if I could get that, yes, right there. I got the right one, that's great. If you're wondering what just happened, that's what's now happening. So all I'm going to do in here is take the anchor point, down to 0. And then just going to move it back so it's visually intersecting with the other one. Bingo. So as you can see, what we really wanted here was parallax, and now we've got it, and we can actually move on. And not only have we got it, but we've gotten ourselves a lot of flexibility, because now we don't just need to track things to the plane of the wall or the floor. They can be out in space in the room, and we have a lot more latitude to design this however we want to. Before we move on, I have made a pre-comp with all of the layers that contribute to O4 track, and I made those grids guide layers so they don't show up in the main shot. And for something that I do want to show up in the main shot, I added one of my 3D elements from Nydia, and you already know I changed this to comp camera, and to get rid of that ugly grid but still have it render quickly, I switched to an OpenGL renderer. I don't need the grid right now. Let's just see what happens. I'll just skip by tens through the scene. And you can see that that object was clearly also created close to the 000 center. And it's a little short, so I'm going to have more work involved to move it into place and get the duration working and all that. But that's going to do it with that for now. And now we move backward to this shot. For this shot, we have gloves in the foreground and a blank dark screen in the background. And as you know, we have multiple ways we could separate those gloved fingers from that screen on either side. Before I select one of them, let's look at what we want compared to what we have. So in addition to the gloves in the foreground, we have some nice reflections in the background. So I want to choose a method of separation that's not going to actually make those compromise. I want to use them as is. You've seen how using a screen blending mode lets me preserve those, and that is exactly what I want to do. So for that reason, I don't think that I'm going to want to use the extract tool, but I will show you what happens if I do. There we go. So we want to remove the darker areas, and let's see it over checkerboard. And you can see what's happening. We are retaining things that are still pretty white. And then if we push harder, things just start to look kind of ugly. Likewise, RotoBrush, which I did try on this, I'm going to spare you my attempt and just point out that things like gaps between fingers like that, RotoBrush doesn't like them. So you could RotoBrush, but this is our final lesson, and we are pros now, and we are going to handle this the way a pro would. We are going to roto it because it's not going to be that bad. Now, I'm not saying amateurs use RotoBrush, not at all. In fact, we're going to rely on one of its core extra tools, but pros use the right tool for the job, and I'm going to show you why right now it's going to be Roto. Specifically, moving things forward, I have added a foreground layer where the fingers will be held out. There is the artwork that's going to be on the screen where he presses play. And then this shot is going to get a Mocha track just for the screen to match that artwork. So let's do that first. And the only reason I'm doing the screen first is just to get a reference for the screen tracked in here. Now this is going to be a little bit familiar. On the right side we are good. Those fingers did not budge. So they're not going to mess up my Mocha track, but all of this happening definitely will. However, I don't want to just try to do the thing off the right side. So looking a little more closely, the finger protrudes out quite a bit, but this down here and all this up here is basically unaffected. So my shape's going to look a little weird. I think I will start where the finger is most extended and start over here. all the way across and down, all the way across here to up there, up to there, like that, and out to there. And now, in terms of accuracy, we've got just about everything we would have had if the whole thing had been here with no movement blocking it. So really nothing more needed than that, or so I think. We're going to find out. Forward worked, except I forgot to turn on perspective, so let's do that again. There might be subtle shifts of perspective here. Maybe not. But it's not going to hurt to have it in this case. So that definitely looks like a success. I will rename it screen and save it on the way out. Now, one thing I forgot is how I'm going to apply it to this target layer. So I have a couple of options. I can corner pin it to this phone, or I can do like we did in our AEVFX lesson, where I make the entire screen my plane and just do one frame with it matched in and then track all that. In this case, I really want precision, and I've got a good shot of these corners. So I'm going to go with an actual corner pin this time, something we really have not done. To prepare for that, I need the element to fill the frame in a pre-comp. So for some reason, the Command Option F shortcut isn't working for me right now. Don't know why, but not going to worry about it. I think that should have been a uniform scale, so I'll just copy the same amount of scaling, and I think we're okay. Yep, we're okay with that. And then this is an Illustrator element, so we do want to turn on continuous rasterization and now pre-comp that. I'll call it screen full. Move everything there. I don't need to open it. I know what it is. Now back in Mocha, let's prepare for what we just set up. And I'm going to show you something we haven't used, which is the set of precision tools that let me get these corners right where they need to be. I want to go somewhere. I would normally start at that anchor frame, but I can't see all the corners there, so this one's better. Now I can loosely move these into place, but there's a tool that lets me do it much better. So let's go to that tool, and that's going to be in the classic view. So now that I'm here, I'm going to carefully use my hand tool, the middle mouse button, to just move this down. And I'm going to open up the Adjust Track tab here, and you see these red squares that showed up around the edges of the surface, as well as this zoom in right here, which moves around whenever my cursor gets near it, because it assumes I'm trying to work where I move the cursor. So it seems a little odd, but let's just click on one of these points, and you'll see that I have a zoom in of that. Now that looks like it's in exactly the right place. That one also looks fine. This one is close, but I need to move it down a little bit, and when it's that close, I will use the down arrow here. It's not really an arrow, but it's a down control. Probably in your view, it doesn't look like it's doing anything, but you may see that I now have that right tangent to that corner. And then finally this point, and that one I would move just up just slightly. Okay, so what was that all about? Oh, and look, I got inadvertently at some point it made a phantom keyframe here. I've seen it do this before. I'm just going to get rid of that. So this is a different keyframe from the one I created before. It is just for the surface. And now I'm going to go back to the beginning here. And this is going to seem like brute force, but it's actually surprisingly effective. This point is now clearly off. In fact, I could drag it closer, or there's one thing I forgot to do. Let me go back to the previous frame, and here I'm going to say Set Master All. Now, there's something a little confusing about this Set Master, but it's actually kind of elegant. So we're not relying on the keyframes we already had in place for the track. Rather, independent of those, or rather almost as a child of those, we're setting a new set of keyframes just for those corners, so those can be independent from the keyframes we already set. That actually set a master for all my keyframes. I could have also just clicked set master just for the surface. It's not really that important because we're not going to get too gnarly here. But now back here, what I want to do is let it try to guess. So I'll click the auto key and boom, it snapped it right where I wanted it. Let's check the other ones. Auto, great. That one already looks good. Oh yeah, this one, auto, got it perfectly. So now it is going to have all my in-between frames also accounted for. I could do the same at the end. Let's just make sure everything's good. Of course, these I can't tell. So we're probably good. That is how fine you can get into controlling this surface, and it's the reason that I did it this way, because I want to see what happens if I use that amount of control. Let me just double check this one. Oh, that's good. You can see it move away a little bit right there at the beginning. So let me just try auto again on that one. Okay, that for some reason I missed that one. And it's funny, you can see things like how it goes in and out of focus slightly. It's incredible. Anyway, that's going to do it for that. I'm going to go back to, actually I'm going to turn off adjust track by just clicking back on track so I get rid of those overlays and go back to essentials, because otherwise sometimes they stick around. I can get my view back to just fitting. But basically we're now actually done here. So I'll save and close this. Now, one thing that might make you go, hey, wait a minute, in what I just showed you was you saw two different sets of little green keyframe marks, and it depended on whether I had the adjust track tab highlighted or not. That's by design, but it's also a little confusing. If you want, you can go into the dope sheet and see the keyframes that are associated with adjust track versus the ones that are associated with transforms, basically what it's tracking with the main Mocha tracker. I wanted to just highlight this so it doesn't confuse you that that's how it displays it. It's meaning to be helpful. Yeah, I suppose it's a little confusing. This is the last kind of really major thing in Mocha that we haven't really touched yet that I know of. And so I'm really happy that we have access to the power of adjust track to do a really precise corner pin right here. Now it's time to see if that hard work paid off. I will create tracking data, and it now defaults to having that turned on, which is great. And this is going to be applied to that screen full layer that I already resized to be the full comp as I need to for a corner pin of this type. And I need the corner pin to be the one that supports motion blur, just in case we have any of that. And now let's, I'm nervous, I'm going to apply it. Oh, look at that. Well, golly. That looks pretty darn locked. Now, the way I'm going to apply it is going to be with my screen transfer mode, which is going to break a little bit, but it'll look a bit closer to what I want. So it's breaking where the fingers are there, which we're going to do next. Let's just comp a little bit. I'm looking at how soft it should be. It needs to be just a little bit softer. I hate to do it, but there you are. So that'd be way too soft. And then another thing I can do is double click to make a mask around the whole layer. And if I go negative expansion, this will cut in on it, but I want to go just a little bit and just also soften that edge by feathering it. And that looks more like it. And of course I can turn on motion blur while I'm thinking about it. Don't think there will be a lot of that, but there's some, there's a little bit. Great. Now, the fingers. Now you can't let it break your heart when you do things to make your images a little bit worse to make them more believable. So a little bit of softness where you can still read the imagery, and a little bit of that realistic gutter that you would actually see around the screen of that particular phone are both completely appropriate choices to make here, and ultimately just make the thing look better because your eye doesn't catch something wrong. My opinion anyway. So here's the thing. I want all of this detail around the edges of these gloves. I love it. And as you and I both know, there's only one tool that's going to give me that, and that's the Refine Soft Matte tool. Luckily, I have it as a separate effect, and so that actually tells me some things about the kind of initial matte that I need. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to include all that. So once again, I will apply Mocha. And I'm going to just try to roto these fingers directly. Let's start with, first of all, I'm going to start around the same place. I don't want anything with blur on it. It doesn't really matter though, does it? How about if I just start on the end frame and then I'm going to leave room. These fingers really don't move, so this doesn't need to be too surgical. And it's not. I'll leave just plenty of extra space because it doesn't matter. And then zooming in. This may be overkill, but I'm just going to get it right as a starting point. And the reason I'm finessing this is I'm planning to just track it directly, so not do two passives, which is what I did when I practiced, but I don't think that I needed to do that, so I'm taking a chance that that is the case. That's plenty good enough. Notice my little fuzzies that I'm going to want, and I'm close, but they're not included. That's good. This time, perspective. I don't think so. I'm just going to go ahead and track backward. That looked very good to the naked eye. Now I return to the scene of that crime and work on these others. These three fingers are going to be handled individually. So let's label things. Let's call this R fingers, and I'll turn that off so it doesn't retrack. What I notice now is while Mocha had all this nice detail to work with on the right side that was maintained and didn't get blurry, over here you can see things get quite blurry. Now, once the fingers clear the screen, we no longer need to worry about them. So keep that in mind. Don't roto things you don't need to. Likewise, this third, I'll call it the third finger. I don't actually know for sure which finger that is. I'm going to call this 1, 2, 3. The third one only peeks in right at the end. So here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to make loose masks on a first pass, and you can just watch me do this in high speed. Now notice there that I left this one activated, and another thing I want to add is I'm free to track these all at the same time. But now I don't know which one just failed. So if I select this one, that stops there. This one goes all the way back there. So it is this one that failed. Well, I would put more work into understanding what's going on, but there's only one more frame where I even need to worry about it. But I could add a keyframe here, go back one frame, and just cover it, or I don't even need to do it that way. So now with my loose masks in place, I'm going to make a new set that are going to be the roto. It is a little bit unfortunate to have to take this amount of trouble, but that's the way it is. I didn't track this to the end either. There we go. So I'll turn these all off, and now again in high speed, you'll see me redraw my masks with more precision. And then, of course, the final thing I need to do is effectively parent each of these to the layer that actually did the track. So, first one, I'm going to link it to one I don't know if it makes a difference whether I have perspective on or not, but I'm going to turn it on. It's not retracking, so it may not. That is too much inside baseball of Mocha, even for me. And finally, let's double check that I did that right. Great. Okay, let's see. And this one could be green too, because that's actually my final matte. And those are tracking in okay. So the rest I will do with keyframes. So once again, that might be overkill, but now I'm pretty happy with it. Keeping in mind that what the fingers do once they leave the screen doesn't matter. Now to apply it, you remember this. We go under Matte. Create AE masks is going to be a fine way to go here. There they are. I'm going to trim the layer to where we no longer need it, so don't worry about that. And if I turn off or hide the mask, you can see a pretty gnarly matte line around that one. But we have a plan. So in addition, Matte Refine Soft Matte restores everything that had gone away. Now let's just preview that as is at 100%. I would potentially tweak that a little bit, but that is basically, for now, what I was after. RotoBrush versus Roto plus Refine Soft Matte. Let's talk about that. RotoBrush gives you a crude matte, and it's only when you add the Refine Soft Matte brush around the edges that you get all the detail that you just saw. So effectively what I've done is allowed myself to do a pretty crude matte on one pass and then kick it to Refine Soft Matte, which is just going to look at all of those edges and find all that soft detail. So this is a perfect case for using that. So this is a great example of where knowing your tools and becoming more advanced will save you a lot of time. So I knew that I wanted something that's usually associated with RotoBrush, but I didn't want RotoBrush to make my mattes because I don't trust it to create a stable base matte. And all it would do is create a very crude matte and then let me paint in where I want the fine detail. So instead, the approach that I took was to give it a very crude matte, but one that's very firm and consistent. And then by applying the Refine Soft Matte tool, it just makes a consistent edge around that where it's looking for all that fine detail. It really works perfectly. I still have the option to either color correct or work with the decontamination matte. I can also adjust how wide an area it's looking at, but even the first result is looking really good to me. So here we have a more straightforward, assumedly, tracking shot and a full screen logo to go with it that is ready to be corner pinned. I will do this mostly at high speed. You may hear me duck in for a comment. Here you can see that with the motion blur, it's a little harder to tell if it's tracking, but actually it looks to me consistent, and we will be applying it with motion blur. Now there, I could see a slight adjustment. So once again, it's going to be a screen transfer. Ooh, yeah, then we get all those nice reflections for free. And this, by the way, is why I really hate tracking markers, because if somebody had stuck a marker on this thing, as you can see, it wouldn't have helped me at all. It would just be messing up my flow with getting that nice reflection happening. And then up here, looks like we have motion blur turned on. We don't. Interesting. So I'm going to turn that on. Did you see it slip? Let me do that again. and I'll zoom in. That is the universal sign that the comp settings are not correct for motion blur. So remember, shutter phase needs to be -half of the shutter angle. And 180 and -90 is the classic film camera blur, and usually very simply what you want. Boom. One little thing I just noticed, for whatever reason, there's no keyframe on the first frame. Rather than go back and make Mocha do it, there's no reason I can't just kind of get this into place. Notice that the motion blur goes away on the first frame unless I have a previous frame. Oops, I didn't mean to go 10 frames back. Previous frame that's even higher. So I'm just going to use the shift arrow key to go up another 20. And that, I could give it more. There we go. That gives it a healthy amount of motion blur even on that first frame. And nobody will know that we didn't also track the corner pin on that frame. So yeah, sometimes rather than choose the perfect solution, I just go for the expedient one, and in that case, kind of a no-brainer. Same with what I'm about to show you. Just to demonstrate that I'm not afraid to actually just do some brute force work for a few frames. My kiss of love is that for continuity, I don't want the logo on the screen to just start here. I want a few frames of it here before it flattens out with this reflection where you can't see it anymore. I looked into doing it with Mocha, and it ended up being basically like doing it by hand. So I'm going to go frame by frame and do it by hand. And I've done now the first frame. And one thing actually that I could do here is just generative fill. Yeah, like that, so I can really see it. Now, position is below corner pin, so I don't have the option to reposition instead of adjusting the corner pin. So let's see if, yeah, I can only adjust one of these at a time. So really, you're just watching me adjust corners, and we're going to do this fast. And that's already pretty much it. I was even wanting to go a frame further, but I don't need to. I skipped this frame. I guess I'll just do it. You can't really see the thing here. But this is an exercise in showing that brute force is sometimes a lot faster. That frame doesn't matter either, so let's get out of difference mode and go to screen and turn off the fill. And we want motion blur turned on, if it's not already. It is. And then we're also going to need, instead of a fill, what we do actually need is some blur. So where it's clear, like over here, you can see we're at 800%. So it's just going to need to be softened to match. I could do a couple more frames, I don't mind. So there you have it. There you have it zoomed in. Here it is in real time. The kiss of love. Now, if you notice that I could have done that even more efficiently by just moving the view over so that the screen that I was adjusting was right next to the effect controls, then you are an efficiency freak and you are hired to do my roto. Thank you. We've touched every shot now and gotten the basic setup happening where we're ready to add graphics in the next lesson. Things I didn't do include creating a foreground matte for the lady in the chair. The track could help us with that if we need it. We may not have the graphics reach that part of the frame yet, so I'm going to wait and see on that one. I never do roto that I don't know that I have to. Also, I could tell this probably at some point would benefit from at least a little bit of a color look. But that'll be also part of the design part if I can remember to get back to it, because we're going to have a lot of other stuff to do. Have fun with this one, and good luck with making your own camera tracker.